Sonic Boom. Insanity. Six fights some robots as heroic music plays. Nothing interesting here, except for the ballot printing robot somehow being a part of the fight, instead of having long since been dismantled for scrap metal. That's a continuity nod that doesn't work. Then they're faced with a giant robot, but the tension is immediately kind of destroyed as Sonic asks Tails about his plan to defeat it already. Then Tails can't get the laser shooter to fire, as I wonder why the giant robot was just standing there doing nothing to anybody all this time. I immediately assumed at this point that the robot would get to do a few more things and the heroes would have to attack it a bit more, while Tails fixes the problem. Instead, Tails does something with the wrench to make it shoot at it and destroy it in one hit. This is not how you write an action scene. The giant robot should be the hardest one to beat. Orbot tells Eggman to go to the mayor, and Eggman says that his trash should have been collected 3 weeks ago. And rather than the mayor saying that he's cutting Eggman off because he's Eggman, the mayor says he'll take care of it immediately because it's an election year. So why was it not collected in 3 weeks if it wasn't because the mayor was doing that on purpose? I guess it was the trash collector being a jerk to him? Then the trash collector tells Eggman to pay the fee. Wait, since when is Eggman being charged for trash collection? Oh good, Eggman lampshades. The mayor says that Eggman had too much garbage, as I suspected. Why does he ever have any garbage instead of reusing the scrap metal from his robots? Wouldn't that be common sense? And somehow, the mayor has the guts to threaten to foreclose on his evil lair. He should have done it immediately then. And Eggman should just threaten to kill him then. Fear of Eggman is obviously the only reason that he wouldn't have foreclosed on his lair as soon as possible. And yet he's not too afraid to do this. I hate that Orbot said Season 1. Fuck fourth wall breaking. Why did Eggman not use the Doomsday device again if he had it for so long without using it for scrap metal? Wouldn't he have just tried to use it on purpose at some point to try to take over the town and forced Sonic to destroy it? Orbot tells Sonic that Eggman's using his base as an inn to pay for something. Why did Sonic think the writers were phoning it in? That was actually a creative and logical idea. The writers don't even know what their good ideas are. Although, well, that is kind of dumb because you think Eggman would always have tons of money. I guess the idea is that he's super cheap, so he'll do anything to make up for the amount of money he had to pay. But then what took him so long to do this? So Amy and her friends check in to see if Eggman's really up to something, and Sonic asks for a drink from Eggman. Why didn't Eggman give him something poisoned? Why didn't anyone suspect him of that? That was the obvious plan. And Tails asks for notepads. Eggman tells Knuckles that he's already using too many towels, and Amy lampshades that he needs to be more accommodating of his guests. Then the turtle says his pillows are gone, and it's because Styx is selfishly using them for furniture in a fort. That's interesting. She also thinks there's pillow people, so she's either especially delusional, or they do exist, and it's a missed opportunity that we don't see it in a fantasy universe. I immediately assumed at this point that this would be resolved, because Eggman would get rid of her pillows on her, because she's not allowed to do this. Also, I was excited when Sonic asked for a drink from Eggman, because I thought most of the focus of the plot would be on the Sonic characters. So I would have preferred it if it was mostly just Sonic and his friends demanding Eggman for stuff in the hotel. They're the only people who would logically go to his hotel in the first place because they're doing it to make sure he's not up to something. Everyone else would just be too scared of him. And somehow, after the mayor says that you need a permit to get a hotel, Eggman doesn't get in trouble. The guest is told not to use a different room every time, and Orbot tells Eggman he has to be nice to the guests. Facetious is told to scram because his room is filthy, and somehow the sailor is encouraging to Eggman, saying he'll get the money. This is Eggman! Then Cubot tells Eggman what he eavesdropped on. A secret reviewer for a magazine will review Eggman's hotel. Eggman fortunately says that he seriously doubts that's how the conversation went exactly. Since when am I smiling during a Boom episode? I think I've been smiling since Sonic's writer remark. Anyways, Eggman tells Amy that this isn't a free paperclip store, and the secret reviewer asks Eggman how he talks to his guests. I thought it would be that guy with the red hat from earlier. Then we see some kids running around knocking something down and walking into the guy. The secret reviewer says he's very particular and he goes to tons of hotels. Lady Walrus demands that Eggman feeds her kids right away. Eggman fortunately is mad at being told, "I demand," but since he's that cheap and greedy, he agrees. Then he treats the secret reviewer to a bunch of food at a dinner table, ignoring everyone else. So why doesn't everyone else get fed by the multitude of robots you would think he would have in his base? Like, you'd think Orbot and Cubot would at least try to pitch in. The food's just cookies. Sonic and Hem say that the hotel is mediocre, and the secret reviewer says he's just an insurance tester and not a reviewer. Wait, why did Eggman believe him when he said he wasn't a reviewer? He wouldn't tell him the truth. So Eggman freaks out and tries to be nice to everyone. He calls everyone imbeciles after wondering if people still sell vacuum cleaners. And out of nowhere, Amy is the reviewer when she has no reason to have the qualifications for that. She is the creator's pet. Wow! They'll give her any job for the plot. How many jobs has she had? For fuck's sake! How does she have the time to have all these different jobs when she's a freedom fighter? She had a job as a sensitivity training person. She had a job as the vice chairman of the Endangered Species Council. I would have preferred if it was the red hat guy. Or the guy that was clearly foreshadowed. Sally wasn't like this. Some plot twists are just stupid enough to not be worth it. Eggman activates a force field around them, calls the mayor, and sends his robots to attack them all with missiles. Tails can somehow stop the missiles by throwing paper at them, and Knuckles whips them with purple long things that are somehow there. Six throws some things, and Amy uses something on the floor for cover from an explosive. Then the Doomsday machine explodes because it got made to spin the fight. I thought it would actually activate and make the plot way more tense. Instead, the entire base is destroyed, and somehow everyone's totally uninjured after being harmlessly sent in the air. Eggman says he's ruined, and the traitor to the planet says that because Eggman was nice to him, he'll make sure his base will get rebuilt, even though Eggman was very obvious about the fact that the only reason he was nice to him was out of selfishness. So he's very nice indeed to be nice to someone like that, and also very stupid to make sure his base gets rebuilt. Eggman would have been taken down. Also, again, why did the writer have a character say plot contrivance? Even most fan fictions don't have dialogue like this. That's always a big warning sign that the writer has no business writing a story because they're that uninvested in the story, because you don't do that with the dialogue. If I read a fan fiction that had dialogue like this, I would stop reading immediately because it'd be such an intrusive joke. And that immediately gets me alienated. My point is, which plot contrivance is the writer even talking about? Mentioning that there's plot holes doesn't make the story good and doesn't make up for anything. Eggman should be able to afford the trash bill just fine without needing to convert his base into a hotel that no one would have any reason to ever visit other than morbid curiosity over Eggman's celebrity status. Because due to laziness, all of the people visiting it are all people we've seen before, and thus they're probably people who already have permanent homes. Like, Lady Walrus definitely would have a home to herself. She's a mother. Did their houses get destroyed to force them to have to go to the hotel? No, that gave Eggman a villain moment. So they have no reason to be here. Is that the plot contrivance? The writer shouldn't have written it then if he was aware of it. Is the plot contrivance that nobody should have even visited Eggman's hotel in the first place considering his reputation? Then this plot really shouldn't have been written. Him getting any business would only make sense if Eggman went to another dimension where nobody knew who he was. And if he made it very clear that he was only doing this out of greed, because he has to be rich to be able to afford making all those machines. So a trash collecting fine would be a drop in the bucket for him. Especially since he can afford to throw away his robot scrap instead of reusing it. So he's just doing this to get back the money he had to pay as fast as possible just for the sake of it. But he talks as if he was ruined. And yet this idiot makes sure he gets his base back instead of making sure this evil supervillain stays ruined. That was stupid. Sonic doesn't even call him out on it. The writer clearly wrote himself into a corner after he made the mistake of having Eggman's base blow up, which would have killed everyone in the room, but apparently they all had rings at the time, even the civilians. And it was very stupid that Sonic and his friends even tried to eat or drink anything Eggman gave them. He had the perfect opportunity to poison them and he didn't, and these supposedly genre-savvy heroes never thought he'd do that. So when it comes to the writing, this story was kinda stupid, but at least it was only by the ending that it fell apart. So by Boom standards, it was surprisingly good for once. I was actually smiling for most of the episode. I was interested in seeing the sheer variety of demands his customers had, because it showed creative effort in the writers. The whole joke was that Eggman was the hotel owner, because otherwise it could have been just a regular hotel owner that sucked and the plot would be exactly the same, aside from the action scene at the end, which was actually pretty creative and thus satisfying to watch. Some people threw stuff at the robot to deal with them. I guess throwing stuff at super strength would be dangerous too. So yeah, some people threw some stuff. I don't remember what that stuff even is. Okay, that's not memorable. I don't even know how to describe the long things. But the point is that the action scene felt like a good payoff when I saw it, unlike the one at the beginning which just flat out sucked. Anybody can write a Sonic action scene where the heroes all beat robots in one hit with the attacks they're most well known for, and I could have figured Tails would use his plane to beat the robot. Why did it do nothing to attack him in all that time? Mr. Eggman. We started out with Eggman going to a warehouse, and being happy that somehow there's a multi-pack of ion diffusers. Why was he just written to have built it himself? And it turns out he threatened the shopkeeper's family last time so he could get these products, because you need a doctorate in evil science to get it. Really? That's the only reason he threatened the shopkeeper? You'd think he'd be doing it all the time. At this point, the shopkeeper's divorced, so he suddenly doesn't care about his family anymore. That's unrealistic. And somehow he doesn't have a doctorate. And there even is a doctorate in being an evil scientist. Why doesn't Eggman just threaten him, then? And because Percy overheard this, she decides to call all of her friends and tell the whole village what she heard. I skipped past the lame musical number that shouldn't exist. This isn't a baby show. We got the point after just 3 seconds. You know, these montages really are unacceptable because this show consists of just an 11-minute short, and that's the whole episode. And yet they still feel the need to pad it out even more by having dialogueless montages. Later on, everyone at Medburger somehow has the guts to make fun of Eggman for somehow not having a doctorate in evil science. He does lose all the time, but it's not like the people who did get one took over the world, or we'd know about it. Sonic says he can't believe Eggman isn't a doctor. If the writer knows this is stupid, he shouldn't have written it. Also, I refuse to believe that he isn't even a doctor in anything. He would at least be a doctor in science. There's no evil science. And he says they should call him Mr. Eggman instead. This whole story seems stupid so far. Predictably, Warbot suggests Eggman going back to university to get his full doctorate. Logically, it would take forever for him to get it. Seriously, why did he not get it? He's determined enough to never give up on his evil plans, but he was lazy enough to have dropped out of class before? So he goes to the evil scientist class that somehow exists instead of being highly illegal. But you think if anything it would just be over the internet. And he accidentally drops his pencil on the floor after he goes into the classroom. And this arbitrarily causes the teacher to tell him to recite some material, even though the class literally just started. Can a teacher really abuse their power that easily? And if the writer knows it's stupid for him to be expected to know this on the first day, he shouldn't have written the teacher to say that. It honestly comes off as they're intentionally writing the show badly when they have a character lampshade their shady writing instead of not writing at all. Knowing there's a problem is the first step. Alcoholics Anonymous knows that. Well, he did deserve the mistreatment because he's evil, but this show makes him the underdog. We see a montage of Eggman's failures at the class, even though he's supposed to have an IQ of like 300, interspersed with the heroes playing sports like soccer. At least we have a parody song about how it's a failure montage, but it's kinda lame. To be fair, Boom Eggman's such a failure as a villain that it does make sense he would have failed in villain school and been awful at it now. Because if there would be a villain school, then somebody who refuses to just destroy Sonic's house when he's sleeping would definitely not do well in it. Even the real Robotniks, come on, they're pretty bad at villainy because they should have killed Sonic in his sleep. Eggman says he'll be fine at his next planned theft if he doesn't draw attention to himself. Does so because he's a large ham, and Sonic and his friends play catch with the thing he tried to steal as Yakety Sax plays again. Wait, is it justified that Sonic even is where he is? Wouldn't he just not be there? So Eggman is humiliated in front of the class because he didn't successfully steal something, when we saw him steal a chocolate bar just fine at one point. So he's kicked out of the study group because somehow more students than just the one who failed are getting in trouble for his one failure. Huh? He's told that he has to get an A on the final, and everyone in the class laughs at him, making me wonder how much guts they have to think they can get away with that. Any other Robotnik in the franchise would immediately plan revenge on them all. All of these people would be dead. What kind of supervillain with robot-making capability would not try to get revenge on everyone who laughed at him? That's not satisfying escapism, that's realistic. Because people in real life wouldn't pursue revenge because they know they couldn't get away with it. So Eggman doesn't. Isn't Boom Eggman supposed to be all about escapism because he's all about embracing vice? And yet he doesn't take revenge. This reminds me of how Sonic fans hated that 06 was being realistic, having realistic graphics, because 06 wanted to reflect how Sonic would look in the real world. And Clement went on a whole rant about how Sonic shouldn't be too realistic, because the characters happen to look cartoony. But then those same exact fans turn around and love this show when it's all about having realistic plots. This show was 1,000,000 times more mundane than the grand scale of 06's bad plot. And yet it's got much better reception. Is it just because it's not in the human world? It looks like it's not mundane, but it is. It's way more mundane than 06 is with its time travel. This is literally just a story about Eggman being a realistic bad student. How many times was this plot done in stuff like sitcoms? Like, this isn't using Eggman as a character because anybody could do this. There's so many episodes that are focused on being mundane and realistic instead of taking advantage of what makes the franchise unique. The sci-fi fantasy elements of Sonic are severely ignored in Sonic Boom. I miss SCC. Something tells me the complaints about being too realistic were only about the art style then, because this is way more realistic than 06 ever was, which was all about stuff like time travel and a god called Solaris, which is still way more Sonic-like than a generic, realistic plot that doesn't need the Sonic characters in it. What matters more, the way something looks or the actual story? If I'm invested in an interesting story, I don't care that the humans look realistic, and I could even forgive the humans being there, as long as it's a fantasy plot. But at least we don't have to see realistic humans in the show. But they would have been less out of place in a show that's much more about real life. Then it turns out he was just having a nightmare because he doesn't want to fail it. I'm impressed that the writer was nice enough to have that not be real. He says that he should just break into the school and steal the answers, which by itself would be an act of villainy. He gets his robots to hang him by some strings attached to the seat of his pants and lower him down to the classroom at night, which lets him steal some answers. You'd think that his weight would be a problem for this, but I guess not. Those are some really wonderful strings. They don't break. It turns out the class started 87 weeks ago. Really? Eggman's mocked by his teacher for wrong answers on his test, as I just have to assume that all the plots of the episodes after this are taking place at the same time as this episode, because Sonic would have gone crazy from boredom if Eggman was doing nothing against him in 87 weeks, just because he was being busy with this. So Eggman's mocked by his teacher for wrong answers on his tests. There are plenty of real-life examples of terrible teachers who humiliate their students. There's even teachers who throw chairs at them. But I still can't help but find the over-the-top, asshole-ish behavior of this teacher to be very distractingly unrealistic right from the start, which makes it impossible to take the story seriously. I don't even take this seriously in Sabrina. Why hasn't he been fired? It turns out the true final exam was to steal the final exam, and Eggman passed. Well, I did predict this, but wouldn't everyone have done this? I'm so confused. He went from insulting Eggman at length for all the wrong answers to being the only one who graduated. And the story ends so abruptly because that's literally the end. There's no action scene at all. So what was the point of the episode? What was the point of showing us a story that's literally just Eggman being a generic bad student despite being a genius? Realistically, geniuses get great grades and become honor students. But you do have to be a hard worker to get good grades later on in high school. Because for some reason you have to waste your life doing extra stuff and putting in extra effort, instead of just knowing the material. That's why I was only an honor student in high school for like 1 year, because I couldn't be bothered. I also almost never did homework. But even I was a better student than Eggman here. Eggman's got an IQ of like 300. How's it that I was a B or A student the whole time, and he just constantly gets Fs? What's the point of showing out the fundamentally ridiculous concept of a university course in villainy that somehow wasn't deemed illegal right from the start if we aren't really told what the projects and questions consist of? It would have been interesting if we had more emphasis on the kind of work Eggman had to do to properly take advantage of the fact that it's a course we'd never see in real life. All we learn is that one of the class projects was stealing, which is somehow not grounds for the course to be made illegal. I'd understand if this was a class taking place in the teacher's basement in secret, not in an actual university out in the open. We could have seen Eggman reading out questions on his test that would be about, I don't know, there could be a personality test, but wouldn't it just be really easy to figure out what the right answers were? Just answer all the most evil options, even if it's a lie. So that can't be it. Of course, maybe they couldn't show you the course material because it'd be about teaching you how to be a great criminal, and we can't tell the audience that. But then what's the point of doing the episode if all the focus is on a genius somehow being a generic terrible student? Actually, it'd make more sense for Sonic to suck at this. And maybe Eggman forcibly enters him in a villainy course. Actually, Tails would work better in this role than Eggman, because Eggman could force him to be here so that he could become a great sidekick for him. It all feels arbitrary because we're not told why he's failing, which would have given us insight into his character and developed it better, explaining why he's so pathetic in this show. It doesn't do anything to lampshade the fact that his conscience obviously holds him back from blowing up Sonic's house in his sleep. The closest we get is that his theft is foiled because he drew too much attention to himself. He's an attention whore. Also because he was too stupid to simply start flying up with his Eggmobile the instant he learned that the heroes were nearby. Granted, then Tails would be able to fly up to him, but only if he could fly fast enough, and that wouldn't let him take back the stolen object if he had the sense to have a dome over his Eggmobile like in every single game, instead of being completely out in the open when sitting in it, which always backfires. And plus he could just push Tails and hit him a whole bunch to get him to fall out of the Eggmobile. He's stupid, but we're not told why. Also, who the fuck thought it was a good idea to have people inexplicably singing while spreading the gossip about Eggman? What's the target audience for the show? Little children? The problem with this is, I thought its whole intended appeal was that it was fan service for the long-time Sonic fans, which would be adults, the only fans in the entire universe who would appreciate self-aware meta-humor. But what adult wouldn't be embarrassed to listen to the character singing for no reason, like it's a little kid's cartoon? At least in Sonic Underground, songs were usually justifying the story, and way easier to skip. It does make sense that they'd have it be revealed that Eggman failed to getting a doctorate because it's self-aware of how much of a failure he is in the show. But they don't take this as the perfect opportunity to finally say that Eggman doesn't want to destroy Sonic's house when he's sleeping, and explain why. It doesn't work because he's supposed to be a genius, and obviously this goes against the original concept for the character, because he wouldn't have been named Dr. Robotnik, or Dr. Eggman, if he didn't have a doctorate. No genius would be an F student. It feels especially hard to believe because we don't even know what most of the schoolwork was. So we don't know why a genius is failing at it instead of just taking notes and memorizing them. Sure, his opinions about how to be a good villain might differ from what they think a good villain is, but he still has notes. Just tell them what they want to hear. And since there was no action scene at all, the whole story was officially a waste of time. It was building up to nothing. You know you've screwed up at a story and action series when I was shocked that the episode ended and felt like it ended way too early. Because, go figure, it was missing a vital component. Having an entire story in Sonic with no action can be justified if it's a breather episode in between stories with a lot of action and tension, where a lot of stuff happened. Because now you need some quiet downtime where the characters talk to each other about recent events, and the audience get a sense of how things have changed. For example, issue 134 of Archie was mostly just about Sonic wandering around Knothole talking to his various friends and family members to get a sense of how things have changed since the year he was gone. So that story having no action was justified because there was so much exposition they needed to give us that there was no room for a fight scene. And that issue was right after a story arc where Sonic and his friends banded together to stop Eggman's big plan. So there was downtime after it all ended to give the heroes time to celebrate their victory, showing us what they normally do for fun, instead of every single story being about them fighting Eggman, which isn't relatable to anyone. But this story is just the definition of pointless filler. It's not original for the most part. It's just cliche, boring, and frustrating.